let's see, there aren't many people tonight, but maybe somebody is a bit late. Yeah, can you hear me well?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so before we properly start with the lecture, just let me remind you what I posted on Canvas, which is this. Well, sorry if it's a bit, let me try to make it bigger. Anyway, you can read it on Canvas as well. So a confusion, because I've been asked many times by several people. When we do exercises in class, when I give you some time and then we check the results together, those things are not graded. I don't give you a grade. It's mostly for you to practice the concepts and the techniques that we're studying, also to revise the material for the final test. Okay, because in the final oral test, I might ask you, I don't know, stuff which is related to the exercises. So the first graded assignment is about the one about the trolley problem. We discussed it in the last class. Actually, tonight I will say something else about it. And well, okay, I instructed you on how to do it. That's the first one of the 3 graded assignments. The second graded assignment will be again 30 points. And this time I will give you some arguments, so to say, and you will have to assess them, okay, to say basically whether they're good arguments or whether they are bad arguments, and explain why, basically. So again, it will be a rather short assignment, the second one. And the last one, which is 40 points, again, it will be an oral exam, basically one-on-one. We will have, let's say, a discussion of 10, 15 minutes. I will ask you questions basically about the main concepts and techniques that we discussed in the lectures. And that's it. So also it's important, let me be clear about this. I will not assign any extra points because I know that some colleagues at ITMO do it. If a student is not performing well, they can do extra assignments and they can get extra points. I personally don't like this policy, to be honest, because I think it's an incentive for the students to not work well during the course, because then they can think like, oh, well, I will do some extra work and fix my grade. So I will not give any extra assignments for any reason. So don't even ask, please. The idea is you have 3 assignments. To be honest, they are not really demanding, in the sense that I'm not asking you. I mean, of course, I ask you to do them with care, precision, and thinking, but I'm not asking you to write 20 pages, for instance. Also, I mean, okay, the course material is not, I think, extra challenging. I think you take other courses that are much more complicated than this one. So the moral is, I'm not asking an incredible amount of work. I think that by paying attention in class, by doing the exercises, by revising the material, you will be very good. So also for this reason, if you submit something bad, it's not in your interest, you will not have a second chance, okay? Okay, any question, practical question about the course or about the previous classes, any kind of question? Okay, okay, so we can start. So as usual, well, now I hope you are familiar with the format. In the first part, I will lecture on some concepts. I have my slides. Then in the second part, in the second class, basically today, we will have some exercises. Tonight's exercises are a bit different than the usual ones, because you will have basically 4 puzzles, 4 famous kind of logical puzzles, and you will have to try to solve them. But again, we will do that in the second part. So in the first part for the lecture, tonight is divided in 3 sections. The first one is a second example of what I call great valid arguments from the past, just to, I mean, it's a famous example from many philosophers actually. Many philosophers discussed it, and not only philosophers. I mean, it has a general interest. And we'll see this argument just to familiarize ourselves with good arguments and how good arguments can be run. The second part is about moral reasoning, and well, I hope it's relevant in general, but it will also be relevant actually for your assignment, because well, the case about the trolley problem is a moral puzzle, and you're asked to build an argument, so hopefully this second part will be useful for the assignment. And the last part will be about recognizing arguments in real life, so to say. I mean, when we encounter them, when we have a discussion, or when we read something, and so on. Okay, for the example of arguments, and again, I'm telling you, this one is another classic. We have seen the argument from Descartes about the existence of the external world. Here it's a classical argument that, again, many philosophers, many thinkers of various kinds, theologians, of scientists, have been thinking about. And again, it's one of those problems that does not have the solution, right? And I mean, the initial thought, the initial intuition sounds like this. Well, suppose that you believe in God and you think like this. Okay, if God exists and God is perfectly good, or infinitely good, as somebody says, and infinitely powerful, then why our universe contains why the universe contains evil things, and by evil usually it's understood, for instance, things like, I don't know, natural disasters, earthquakes, droughts, or I don't know, things like viruses, bacteria, or also, I don't know, evil which is created by humans, like, I don't know, wars, crimes, poverty, so on and so forth. I mean, all the bad things that are around us. Or think about the fact that, I don't know, in order to earn money and sustain ourselves, we need to work, okay? For instance, that's arguably an evil thing. Someone might argue. So, again, I invite you, I mean, some of you might be religious, some of you might not be religious. I mean, it doesn't matter, I think, in the context of appreciating the argument and how it works. So, also, these arguments, well, it talks about God. And, well, the understanding here, of course, there are many different religions and in different cultures. I think an argument like this works for those religions. Well, there are several, even though not all of them. The so-called monotheistic religions, when there is one God, and this God, this divinity is understood to be the creator of the universe, and being taught as infinitely good and infinitely powerful. Maybe, again, in other religions, maybe this problem does not apply, but to many religions, this problem applies and is discussed. And again, I encourage you to think about the arguments, regardless of your religious beliefs, whether you have any. I don't know, put yourself in the perspective of someone who believes in the classical, I don't know, monotheistic God, and then you have this problem, why there is evil around us if the universe was created by God, and so on and so forth. Yeah, Okay, so far we only have, I mean, this beginning of the problem, so to say. We can call it an intuition. We can, I don't know, with our system one, if you recall the difference, we can perceive that there is a problem. at least for someone who believes in God. But then if we want to
हाँ
progress our understanding of the problem and possibly finding a solution,
रेड टेल कैटफिश है
or at least an attempt to a solution, because I told you this is a very difficult problem
ठीक है,
and
मुझे आप
people have
व्हाट्सएप
given
करो जरा
different
इसकी फोटो
answers. So the
टर्टल की
idea is
और
that what
इसकी,
I'm
ठीक है, और
trying to
इजी पैसा नंबर
transmit
सेंड
you
करो.
is to, for the entirety of the course, to put arguments in valid form, right? By now, you will be maybe a bit tired of this concept, but it's very, I mean, the point I'm trying to make is that it's very powerful. So we can put the very problem of evil in valid standard form. Standard form, just to remind you, is when you take an argument and you clearly separate premises and conclusion. That's called the standard form. Well, valid is our usual definition of validity. So the argument can sound like this. I mean, you can find different formulations, but this is pretty standard. So the premise one, God made the universe. God is perfectly good and all-powerful. If something is made by a perfectly good and all-powerful being, then it is perfectly good. Conclusion: the universe contains no evil. So the question for you is, if the argument as it is stated now, is it a valid argument? Zane?
Do we have the assumption that if something is perfectly good, then it has no evil?
Yeah,
As
exactly.
you're saying?
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's a good point. No, well, to answer your question, no. Remember that when we evaluate validity, we should not use any background assumption. So if the question is the argument as it is written now, is it valid?
No, it's not.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So this is another example. Good. When we discussed the last week about background assumptions, and that's exactly what is missing, the one that Zane mentioned, something that says that if something is perfectly good, then it contains no evil. So notice that, so this process of considering background assumptions actually, I mean, further and better our understanding of what is going on. Now, if we add the premise 4, which is exactly the one that was suggested, now it becomes perfectly valid. It said, if something is perfectly good, then it contains no evil. Yes, sorry, Samir, yes.
Well, I just had this point in mind that this word all-powerful, all-powerful can be, consists of two things, good and bad. All-powerful means good is also a power, evil is also a power. So he is all-powerful. So God is evil, maybe.
Wait, but no, I'm not sure I would agree, because, no, I think that powerful, if you are powerful, for instance, if you are perfectly powerful, you can do whatever you want, right? You can do things. But then it means you can do bad things or good things, right? But it doesn't mean that you will do them. So you can, I think that God could be perfectly powerful, but it doesn't mean that God will do evil things. Because, I mean, the point is, I can be powerful, I can be able to do evil things, but it doesn't mean that I will do them, right? Does it make sense?
Yes, at one, at to a certain extent it makes sense, but you are saying that necessarily you won't do it, but you have the power to do it, right?
I lost you.
You still have the power to do that, right? Harm,
I
wrong.
cannot hear you, Samir.
Well,
Is it only me?
yeah, my mic is on.
Yeah, we can hear some.
Oh, that's strange. I cannot hear anybody. Oh, what's going on? Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know what happened.
Can
Sorry,
you
Samir.
hear me now?
Yes, sorry, I lost you in the middle of your.
It's okay. I was saying that God is a entity which allows the happening of evil in order to prevent a bigger evil or whatever. You know, if you're cutting an onion, you cut one little bit of blood comes out. But I'm just this is just an example that something wrong happens with you, evil, a little bit. So a car accident maybe, you know. So what who was the bigger power, or who was, is it the evil itself, or maybe God's allowance, the permission of God?
Yeah, I see. Okay, I understand, I think. Yeah, I mean, this idea of allowing, as you said, some evil, maybe because it's part of a bigger plan, if I understand you correctly, and the bigger plan is good. Yeah, that's actually, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, and several people argue about the problem of evil in this way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah. Okay. So here we have, notice what's going on here. We have a valid, so as it is stated now in this full form, it is a valid argument, we said, but I think everyone agrees here that the conclusion is false. I mean, the conclusion says something very strong. It says the universe contains no evil. I mean, absolutely no evil things. So I think, I don't know, maybe there is room for debating even here, but the conclusion of the argument is false, which means, so we have basically we have a valid argument, but with a false conclusion. What does that mean? Which kind of information can we extract from the fact that the argument is valid and it has a false conclusion? Yeah, Zane?
The premises are not all correct.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, Shamil?
This argument is unsound.
Yeah, also, yes, you're both correct. Yes. Yes, because it is valid, but the conclusion is false. So for sure it is not sound, which also means that for sure at least one premise is false. It follows from the definition. Yeah, well, so you're both correct. It's definitely not sound, and it means that at least one of the premises must be false, okay, for sure, because it is valid and the conclusion is false. It cannot be that all the premises are true, because if they were true, given that it is valid, then the conclusion would be true. But we just said that the conclusion is false, therefore at least one of the premises must be false. So this highlights another good feature actually of putting arguments in the valid form. Because again, if I have an argument which is valid, where all the background assumptions are clearly stated and so on, and I know that it leads me to a false conclusion, like in this case when we say that, oh, our universe contains no any bad thing, then I'm sure that at least one, maybe more, of the premises is false. So it's a kind of
brown sand आई है brown sand.
I mean, the notion of validity allows us to
ठीक है
attain some information. Then you want to ask something,
छोटा पैकेट है,
your hand is from before.
कोई फिश का ऑरेंज कलर का जो होता है वो कितने का है, छोटा पैकेट फीड का?
No, it's from before.
हाँ, ऑप्टिमम.
Sorry, yeah. So
कितने का है?
here, as I was telling you, this is a debate that has been, I mean, it has no clear answer, but I think it's interesting to explore a little bit um, some options
अच्छा,
that can be
तो
discussed.
चलो ये
Well, one obvious
4,000 में कर
reaction
दोगे?
in front of this argument, in front of this valid argument, is to be like,
50
well,
रुपए नहीं छोड़ोगे? 50 रुपए?
maybe we shouldn't believe in the
50 रुपए नहीं
existence
छोड़ोगे?
of God, at least the God
पूछ लो
of,
उससे,
let's
मेरा
say,
भी
it is as it
लेपर्ड
is
करना, अपने
traditionally
लेपर्ड के पैसे
understood
मैंने
in
देने हैं, लेपर्ड
monotheistic
कोरियर लेपर्ड,
religions as
टीसीएस नहीं
being
करना.
the creator of the
क्या
universe
करोगे आप?
and infinitely
आप
good
क्या
and
करते हो?
infinitely powerful. So one can be like, okay, use these arguments, so to say, to support an atheistic position and say like,
ठीक है,
well,
फिर ठीक है, बिलाल कराओ.
it's because P1 and P2 are false. That's, I mean, those are exactly the premises which are false.
मैं दे
You
देता
can
हूँ, मैं पैसे दे
actually
देता हूँ, 300 दे देता हूँ.
play
तो
around.
बुकिंग के कितने
I
पैसे
mean,
हैं?
if you
कार्गो के
play
कितने
around
पैसे हैं?
with premises and conclusion, and if you're an atheist, you can actually,
यार हवा ज़्यादा भरना,
I mean, by
हवा
moving
ज़्यादा
around
भरना शापर
premises
में.
and conclusion, come up with this argument for atheists, which is says the universe contains evil, so
नहीं,
that's the
आज रात कराओ.
conclusion. I mean, that's the negation of
हाँ
the
यार,
conclusion of the previous argument. Then you say
हाँ हाँ, मैं पेमेंट
premise
अभी
2
करने
is the
लगा हूँ. ठीक
same.
है.
You say if something is perfectly good,
इसके साथ और कौन सी
then it
मछली रहेगी
contains
टर्टल और कैटफिश के साथ?
no evil. Notice
हाँ,
that there is what we're calling an intermediate conclusion, if you remember. Basically, from
अच्छा,
P1 and P2, we conclude that our universe
कोई भी
is
नहीं है
not
पहले,
perfectly good.
कोई भी नहीं है,
It follows validly from P1 and P2.
कोई भी नहीं है, कोई भी नहीं
And
है.
then you add another premise, which is, again, it's actually like before. If something is made by a perfectly good and all-powerful being, like God, then it is perfectly good.
ये रेटेल
It follows
कैटफिश
that
ज़्यादा
our universe
ज़्यादा रह
is
लेती हैं
not
इकट्ठी
made
बड़ी
by a
होके.
perfectly good and all-powerful being.
ठीक
So,
है, फिर
I
ये
mean,
मैं 4
just
ले
to
लेता
show
हूँ यार
you,
कैटफिश.
one possible reaction to
हाँ,
the
22
argument is
से पूछ
just,
लो कि नहीं
so to say,
डिस्काउंट
to be
होगा.
an atheist and
हाँ,
identify this
2
solution of the problem.
कैटफिशेस. ठीक है, बिल्कुल बिल्कुल, हाँ बिल्कुल है. 1800 जमा
Well,
2000,
so
3800 हो गए,
this is, so to say, a
3800 हो
famous
गया.
argument in favor of atheism. So,
हाँ,
and we told you it is valid.
3800
I
हो
mean, I
गया ना.
told you it is valid. Does the fact that this
अब
argument is
300 रुपए
valid
रक्षा के
proves that our universe was not created by God?
बाइकिया पे चले जाओ यार.
Say.
चलो ठीक है, रक्षा के देता हूँ मैं. ठीक है, 300 दे रहा हूँ. 4100 हो गया.
I think not. This argument just
अब
says that the
4100 हो
God
गया.
can
इसमें 250 रुपए
create an
की फीड.
evil
ठीक है,
thing. I don't know. But
ये दोनों खा लेंगे.
can
टर्टल भी खा लेगा, कैटफिश भी खा
said
लेगी.
that God does not exist.
अच्छा, 4350 में आपको कर रहा हूँ इजी पैसे.
Yeah. Mm, yeah, this
4350 नहीं नहीं,
argument,
इसमें वो
okay,
बिलाल
it's
देवो के कितने
valid,
पैसे
which
हैं?
is a positive virtue of the argument, but of course, it cannot constitute a proof. And when we
वहाँ
use the
जाके
term
बताओगे आप
proof,
मुझे, है ना?
we mean something
वहाँ जाके बता देना मुझे.
conclusive that without any doubt shows something.
ठीक है, फिर मैं आपको
Obviously,
4350 अभी कर रहा हूँ.
I
ये
mean,
आज रात में
somebody
भेज दो
who
ताकि
is
मैं सुबह सुबह
religious,
जाके उठा लूँ.
for instance,
ओके भाई, अल्लाह हाफिज़.
somebody who is religious and so to say wants to defend God in a sense, what they could do, they could, for instance, attack, criticize, or argue that one of the premises is not true. Okay, so an atheist, for probably, let's say, would say that all the premises
मुझे
are
अपना मोबाइल
true,
दें.
the argument is valid, and the argument is sound. A person who is, believes in a traditional monotheistic religion would question the argument and specifically argue that one of the premises is false. Okay. So this is to remind you that, well, validity is an important feature of arguments because it guarantees this support from the premise to the conclusion, but it's not enough. We always need also that the premises are true. So, it's always important also to discuss each premise, right? So, okay, suppose someone is religious. We saw what an atheist will say. If someone is religious, of course, he or she does not want to deny that premise one and premise two, right? If they believe in God, they traditionally believe in God as the creator of the universe, so P1, and also believe that God is perfectly good in the traditional understanding and all-powerful. So what can you think of any strategy that, let's say, a religious person can employ to resist this argument? What can be said? Something was already suggested by Samir, but there are other options.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Mm-hmm. Yes. So again, suppose you are religious, and so you want to defend, so to say, the existence of God, understood as perfectly good and perfectly powerful. What could you say in response to this argument? The point is that I'm trying to make is that if you want to criticize an argument, usually you criticize, either you criticize its validity, but in this case the argument is valid, or you criticize one of the premises. I repeat, if we want to criticize an argument, we always have two options. Either we claim that the logic of the argument is bad, meaning that the argument is not valid, but in this specific case, the strategy does not work because it's valid, or we criticize at least one premise, or possibly more than one. So in this case, if you are a religious person, you should criticize either premise 3 or premise 4, basically. What could a religious, the question is for you is, what could a religion person say to criticize either P3 or P4?
I think P3 is the most. Also, I should have raised my hand.
Okay, yes, Zain, and then, no, please go ahead, and then Ekaterina.
Okay. So I think P3 is more sensible to criticize because it's a generic premise that's not always correct. It's not definite that if something is created by a good or perfectly good being, it would be perfectly good, or other way around.
Okay, so that's a good point. Premise 3 is maybe too general, as you say. Yes, you're right, because it says everything which is made by a perfectly good and all-powerful being is perfectly good. So it's open to counter-examples. Okay, can you think of counter-examples? Or let's hear also Ekaterina. Yes.
Yeah, I don't think there's a good example here because perfectly good and all-powerful being can't be said for anything other than God. Yeah, so I think P2 should be God is the only perfectly good and all-powerful.
Yeah. Okay, that's actually, that's a good observation. We could actually refine the argument. Yes, that's by saying God is the only perfectly good and all-powerful. Yeah, okay. Good point. Yeah, that's a strategy. Yeah, Ekaterina, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, we also can criticize premise 4 because I think that the fact that if something is perfectly good doesn't mean that it doesn't contain no evil, and we can say that evil is for making people stronger and something like this.
Yes, great. Yeah, great, Ekaterina. That's a very classical answer. Uh, Notice that, and that many religious thinkers use this kind of answer. Notice that you're also perfectly right in saying that the target of this criticism, remember, it's important. I want you to, I mean, be really on board when, with this idea that if we criticize an argument, again, either we criticize the logic, the validity, or we target one specific part, one specific component of the argument. This is important because it is as if an argument is a sort of machine which is made of different pieces that work together. And in the case of the premises, they all together support the conclusion. But notice that if one of them falls, so if one of them is false, then the argument becomes overall bad, right? Because it's like the premises are the foundations of the conclusion, so to say, right? They support the conclusion. If you're able to undermine one premise successfully, this is typically sufficient to undermine the whole argument. It's like you identify one weak spot, so to say, criticize it, and if you are successful in undermining that weak spot, actually you are undermining the whole argument. So that's another important, I would say, virtue of putting arguments in standard form, because then each premise is separated and you can independently assess it. And if you want to criticize an argument, you target that specific piece and you criticize it. So yes, Ekaterina, the idea you suggested, yeah, it makes a lot of sense. To argue that, yeah, the premise for if something is perfectly good, then it contains no evil. I don't know, the classical examples are that maybe you should distinguish between the whole thing and parts. So for instance, you can have a perfect day, for instance, but it doesn't mean that your perfect day is made only of perfectly good moments, so to say. Actually, maybe, I don't know, in the morning you received a bad news, so that was evil in a sense, right? But then, I don't know, throughout the day, other events happen which are good, and all in all, you end up, okay, that's not a really good example, but all in all, you end up having a perfectly good day, even though it contained evil. Yeah, Samid.
Yeah, there is this thinking notion that a man, a human, is made on the image of God. Do you know this?
Mm-hmm.
So, the German philosopher Hegel, he says the absolute self in man is not mere God-like. It is God. Man is born with the sorrow of finitude. So, just thought-provoking question that what is the difference between God and human? Because God is creative, I'm also creative, and I can do also evil. I can murder someone. God can also kill someone. What is that thing which makes me different from God?
Yeah, well, I don't know. Yeah, again, that's a very, well, yeah, I don't have an answer. That's a very profound question. Theology, all these discussions about the nature of God, the difference between, God and human, if there is a difference at all. Yeah, that's something very fascinating. If you ask me, I don't have an answer. I like to read about this stuff.
Yeah,
Do you have your answer that you want to share?
No.
Yeah. Those are, I'm not very religious myself, to be honest. I consider myself to be agnostic, but I find these discussions very fascinating. Yeah. Yeah, so coming back to P4, Yeah, my example maybe was not very good, but maybe this example um, can work better. Well, suppose that, I don't know, every time you have an exam or test or whatever during your student career, you always get the maximum grade, like every time, literally every time.
अम्मा नोकिया चाहिए अम्मी
So after a while, you don't even get much pleasure out of always getting the best grades, probably, right? It becomes even boring. So somebody could argue it's actually better for someone if maybe, so consider this case, maybe you start from not very good grades, so that's your evil, so to say. You get some evil by getting some kind of bad grades, but then you progress, right? And you see yourself improving. So arguably, the second situation when you start from bad grades and you improve is better, is overall better, it's better as a whole than a situation when the first one, when you always get perfectly good grades, right? For the reasons that, I don't know, progress can be good, can be a good thing. So the idea would be that, notice that the second situation is better than the first one, even though the second situation, the progress situation, contains evil and the first one does not. So the idea would be that, yeah, somebody could argue, yes, God, there is some evil in the universe, but yes, we were saying before, it's part of the plan, it's part of the big plan of God. And all in all, if you consider the universe as a whole, then it is perfectly good, even if it contains evil. Yeah, Samid, you wanted to add something, or it's...
Sorry, I forgot to lower my hand.
Okay, yeah. So that's the idea. And notice that again, reasoning like this targets exactly premise 4. Okay. Again, so let me stress for the last time that, again, putting arguments in standards form clarifies, hopefully, clarifies our thinking, because it's like breaking arguments into pieces. Okay, the second topic that I want to discuss today, after this example of the problem of evil, it has to do with moral argumentation in general. We will see how moral arguments, well, we will be very brief. There is a lot more that could be said, but we will check some basics and essentials. So moral arguments appear everywhere. Usually, well, morality deals with, our ways of conduct in society, together with other people or individually. So, and moral arguments appear every time, well, either, I don't know, somebody is discussing how to live their lives, how to treat others, for instance, but also, I don't know, when it comes to public policy, for instance, I don't know, if you think about issues, typical issues like capital punishment, abortion, euthanasia, I don't know, think about artificial intelligence, actually. How it should be used, for instance. That's a realm of moral argumentation as well. And also, given that you are actually asked to build a moral argument for your first assignment, I hope that what I'm going to cover is going to be useful. So, yeah, in your assignment, we have the trolley problem. Yeah, ours was a little bit different because we had 2 people in the other track, but I couldn't find a photo. But yeah, but the principle is the same. So just to remind everybody, this was the scenario, just scenario 1. In the assignment, you have 2 scenarios, but here is just scenario 1. Basically, just to quickly remind, the tram is going towards 5 people. And if nobody does anything, the tram will if nobody intervenes, the tram will just run over 5 people and kill them. What you can do is you can pull this lever so that the track will go to the upper, the tram will go to the upper track, and only one person will be killed instead of 5. Okay, so that was the problem. So, okay, here again, people can disagree, but many people, and I'm one of them, I think is the correct answer, think that in this scenario 1, the morally right thing to do, so the correct thing to do from a moral point of view is to just pull the lever so that the tram goes in the upper track. Now, again, to motivate our answer that it's correct, it is morally right to pull the lever in the trolley scenario. In scenario 1, we can run this argument, which is it's impossible to save all 6 people. That's a fact, a feature of the scenario. Premise 2, if I pull the lever, I will save 5 people and kill 1. Premise 3, if I don't pull the lever, I kill 5 people and save 1. Conclusion, it is morally right to pull the lever. So usual question for you. As it is stated, is the argument valid?
I think not, because I'm sorry, I don't put the.
It's Katerina.
I didn't raise the hand, so.
Okay. But I see end by Ekaterina. It was you?
No,
Okay, Ekaterina. So first.
I think it is valid. Wait, it is invalid argument because we don't have any information in premises about what is moral right and what is moral wrong.
Okay, great. Yes, I saw there were other ends, but I hope you want to say the same thing because it's the correct answer. Yes, you're perfectly correct. Notice that it cannot be valid because, as the conclusion is a moral statement. It says it's morally right. It's the correct thing to do, to pull the lever. But nowhere in the premises we talk about, let's say, laws of morality or things which are right to do. We just never mention that in the premises. So it can be, it cannot be valid, okay? So what happens is that premises, basically, they only describe facts, facts of this imagined scenario, right? These are just 3 facts. It's impossible to save 6 people. If I pull the lever, this happens. If I don't pull the lever, something else happens. So P1 to P3 are just facts, but the conclusion is a statement about morality. So, as usual, again, when you have an invalid argument, it's possible to add 1 or more premises to make it valid. In this case, for instance, I would add P4, which would be something like if somebody is forced between saving N people or M people, maybe you could formulate it better, I don't know, and you cannot save N plus M, so to say, and N is greater than M, then it is morally right to save N people, okay? So, now the argument becomes valid, and because notice that again, now in our argument we are mentioning there is a premise about morality in general. So we can call P4 a moral premise. It's just a premise about how a particular aspect of morality works. Okay? In case of moral arguments, so this is relevant for your assignment if you make sure that your assignment includes a moral premise, because without a moral premise, if the conclusion is moral in nature, the argument simply cannot be valid. Okay. So, what is a moral statement? Well, let me be clear first. If you ask me what is morality, that's a very interesting. What is morality in general? That's a very interesting question. That it's also extremely difficult to answer. I mean, people have teach entire courses or devote their entire life studying morality, what it is and how it works. Okay, obviously we're not doing that here because it would, although very interesting, it would lead us, it would require too much time. But for our purposes, first of all, it's important to understand the distinction between a moral statement and a non-moral statement. A moral statement usually, it's something that says, well, a certain action, a certain behavior, a certain policy, maybe a certain law, for instance, is right or wrong, or we can say moral or immoral, or find some synonyms. Or also it can apply to people. We can say, I don't know, this person is moral, immoral, or maybe, I don't know, the motives beyond our actions. So these are examples of, just to distinguish clearly between moral statements and non-moral statements. Serena should keep her promise to you. Why is it a moral statement? Well, because there is should, which kind of indicates a moral obligation, and also because we are implying that it is morally correct to keep her promise to you, right? So in this sense, the first one is a moral statement. Or if somebody says that abortion is immoral, okay, that obviously is a moral statement. Or I don't know, we ought to protect Liu from the angry mob. This again, this ought here suggests a moral reading, saying that there is a moral obligation, so to say, to protect Liu from the angry mob. It's wrong to treat James so harshly. That's another moral statement, because, well, we are saying that a certain action is wrong. Or also, as we said, moral statements can be about specific people. When we say, my father, for instance, is a good man. So, on the other hand, non-moral statements, they are just basically descriptions of facts. They say that something happened, or something is the case, but of course without making any judgment about whether these facts are right or wrong, good or bad. So if you say, Serena, to use similar but different examples to illustrate non-moral, Serena did not keep her promise to you, so that's a fact. We are not saying it's bad or wrong, we're just stating a fact. James was treated harshly. Again, it's a non-moral statement. Some people think that abortion is immoral. Again, we're just reporting a fact. Liu was protected from the angry mob. That's a fact. Or also, I don't know, my father tried to be a good man. That's a fact. It's a description of something. It's not a moral judgment. So to build a good moral argument, like you're required to do in the assignments, it's gonna be basically the conclusion is gonna be a moral statement, right? So the premises are going to be, there must be at least one moral premise, at least one, possibly more, but for sure at least one, and then other premises which are non-moral statements. So typically the premises is a mix of non-moral statements and moral statements, and the conclusion is a moral statement. I'm talking just about moral arguments. So I don't know, if you take this very simple example. But again, obviously, I encourage you to be more sophisticated in your assignment. But here it's just to illustrate the point. You can say it's wrong to inflict unnecessary pain on a child. That's the moral premise, right? Because it says, oh, sorry, there is a typo. It says it is wrong, meaning it's morally wrong. That's the moral premise. Premise 2, spanking inflicts unnecessary pain on a child. And that's the non-moral statement. Okay. It just describes a fact. Conclusion is a moral statement, and it says that spanking is wrong. Okay. So you see that to illustrate how, I mean, with a very simple example, how a moral statement works. In this sense, in this case, we have like a general case. It's wrong to inflict unnecessary pain on a child, like a general case, and then, so to say, a general rule of morality. And then P2, it's like specifying and saying that spanking is a case where you inflict unnecessary pain on a child. And therefore, it falls under rule number 1. Sorry. So remember, yes, this is very important, that in your moral argument, there absolutely must be at least one moral premise. Because without the moral premise, if the conclusion is a moral statement, simply the argument cannot be valid. As philosophers like to say, you can derive ought from is. I mean, from the mere description of facts, you cannot derive as a conclusion some moral judgment, right? You need other moral judgments to play a role within your argument. Yeah, okay, obviously, if you remove the moral premise from the previous argument, simple argument about spanking, then it's the argument is no longer valid. And the problem is exactly that the moral premise is missing. Okay. So once you have your moral premise in your argument, you also need a non-moral premise. I mean, at least one, again, possibly more. It depends on the specificities of the argument you're building. Because usually, even though not always, what happens is that the moral premise, as I was saying, makes a sort of general claim, like in the example of the trolley problem. It was like, well, if you're forced between saving n people and m people, n is greater than m, and so on and so forth. That's a kind of general statement. Then in your moral argument, you also need some, how to say, non-moral statements about some specific case that you are discussing, okay? Some premises that plug into the argument, the necessary specificities of the case that you are discussing, okay? For instance, we might, all of us, okay, might agree, let's say, that murder is wrong. Murder is morally wrong. Or let's say that we all agree. But from this very moral statement that murder is wrong, we cannot, for instance, if we're talking about abortion, to just immediately conclude that abortion is wrong, right? You say premise, murder is wrong. Conclusion, abortion is wrong. That's definitely not valid because we need a factual, we need at least one extra premise. In this case, the extra premise
zero size angel bhi aayi hai.
Abortion is a case of
Zero size angel.
Okay. Well, I'm just using examples. I don't want to endorse any position or its contrary.
अच्छा, बड़ी angel. बड़ी एंजल कितने की है?
These are just examples. I'm not making any statement about these topics, obviously.
क्या साइज है?
As usual,
कलर क्या है?
these mechanisms that I was telling you to make about
मिक्स यानी
making
ब्लैक और वाइट?
implicit
ब्लैक और वाइट?
premises, background premises explicit,
नहीं
it
यार,
works obviously also in the case
नहीं
of
पसंद नहीं आया कलर, येलो वाला चाहिए था जो जिसका सर
of
येलो
moral
होता है।
argumentations. And as I was telling you, it always
ठीक है,
often happens that
4 टर्टल 2
the
कैटफिश।
premises which are left implicit
चार
are
चार
many
टर्टल, हाँ
times
एक
the ones that
फीड का
can
पैकेट।
be
ये आज रात कराना ताकि
doubted
ट्रैफिक कम होगा ना, तो मैं
or
सुबह सुबह जाके ले लूँगा, ट्रैफिक कम होता
criticized.
होगा यहाँ पे।
Okay. So, yeah, consider this argument about human cloning,
सुनो मेरी बात
right?
सुनो,
And the argument
सुनो
is like
सुनो,
this.
मैं ना
Cloning
बहुत दूर रहता हूँ
humans
रावलपिंडी से,
is
इस्लामाबाद से थोड़ा
unnatural.
दूर रहता हूँ। रवात का नाम सुना?
That's the
रवात का,
premise. Conclusion, cloning
रवात
humans
का नाम
is
सुना है?
morally
कलर
wrong.
सेदा या रवात का नाम सुना है?
Now, I don't even ask you because
मैं ना
now,
1.5 घंटा दूर रहता हूँ, जहाँ 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 से
I mean,
जहाँ मछली आनी है ना,
everyone
वहाँ
should
पे
be
से मैं
able
1.5
to
घंटा दूर
appreciate
रहता
that
हूँ,
it is not
और
valid,
ट्रैफिक
right? And the
बहुत
fact
ज़्यादा
that
होता है शाम को। अगर आप कल
cloning
भेजोगे तो शाम को
humans
मैं
is
पहुँच ही नहीं पाऊंगा टाइम
unnatural,
पे।
it doesn't follow
तो
that
मैंने जाना भी आना
humans
भी है
can
इसलिए।
be. But however, okay, what I can ask you is what can
व्हाट्सएप
we
कर दिया है, व्हाट्सएप कर
add
दिया है।
as a premise? Which kind of
हाँ,
premise can
ये आज
we
रात को ही
add
करो और
to
फिर
the
मुझे बता
argument
देना, मैं
to
जाग रहा हूँ,
make
सारी
it
रात जाग
valid?
रहा हूँ कि कब मिलेंगे, कब मैं जाऊँ, ठीक है?
Anybody? Which premise can we add
ओके, थैंक यू।
to the argument to make it valid? Yeah, Ekaterina?
Something unnatural is always wrong.
Exactly. Yeah. So if somebody argues like this, I mean, the argument that you have here, what they have in mind is that a principle like, yes, as you said, anything unnatural is morally wrong. Now, if you add this extra premise, then the argument becomes valid. It is valid in this current form. However, notice that this is exactly one of those cases where the added premise, the premise which was left implicit, well, arguably, again, we can disagree here, but arguably, for sure, it can be criticized. Okay, because I don't know, maybe somebody wants to intervene. In which way we can criticize premise 2? It says that anything unnatural is morally wrong, or everything.
Can we criticize the premise as well, or
Yeah.
this unnatural word is, you know, like I was saying that human brain is finite. So suppose 100 years ago somebody is thinking, okay, they will travel to Mars. That is unnatural. So, but that is very necessary.
Yeah.
Because I feel like this earth is prison for me. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, you're actually, that's interesting. If you reason like this, you are actually, I think, if I understand you correctly, questioning the meaning of natural and unnatural, right? Yeah, I actually agree. These are concepts which are, to me, actually very strange. I tend not to use actually the concept natural and not natural because I cannot make a reasonable distinction between what is natural and what is unnatural. But okay, yeah, there were also other people.
And one point.
Right, yeah.
For example, some years ago, if somebody is thinking that natural baby delivery is okay, but unnatural baby delivery nobody heard of. But now there is operated unnatural delivery as well, right? So
Yeah.
the unnatural operated delivery is morally right to save the mother's life as well, you know, medically.
Yeah, that's a good counterexample. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Even though strictly speaking is unnatural, whatever that means. Yeah, sorry, there were other people that raised their hands, but sorry, I lost Shamil and then Paulina.
Yeah, I wanted to say, like, if we think that nature is that the definition of natural means that we can occur with actions or events in real world, like in this lecture about we can sense, we can touch, we can feel this feeling. That's the meaning of nature, and nature is that things, events, or something that simply doesn't exists here. We can't even touch, feel, or do something with this. But for example, people imagining fairy tales, legends, and therefore they describe the things that doesn't really exist. And this statement means like legends, anything unnatural is morally wrong. Fairy tales and legends is unnatural, describe something unnatural, so that means like this fairy tale is wrong.
Yeah, that's another good counterexample. Yes, some events described by some or science fiction or fairy tales. Yes, that's a smart counterexample. Yeah. Thanks, Shamil. And Paulina?
Yes, sorry, maybe my example will sound ridiculous and strange, but where on the closest it's unnatural, is a no. In the nature,
What, sorry? I
where on
didn't.
the closest it's unnatural.
Yeah. Yes,
And being naked in the public,
it's
it's
natural.
inappropriate. So it's
Yeah, actually, sorry, that's a really good example. Yeah, I like it. Yes, if you think about it in a certain sense, you're right. Wearing clothes is unnatural. I never seen animals, well, except domesticated dogs, but that's another story. I never seen animals wearing clothes. So it looks like wearing clothes is unnatural, right? Yeah, but we don't consider it morally wrong. Yeah, good example. Yeah. Sorry, somebody else. Sorry, my Zoom is misbehaving. Does anybody want to add something? I cannot see names.
Yeah, me.
Yeah.
So, just who defines this morality? Who is the person who wrote this book? I want to meet that person.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's a legit question. Who brought morality? I did. Okay. Well, you touch upon again, interesting topic. Every time we discuss morality, and we can discuss, like, I don't know, abortion. Some people might think abortion is moral, other people think abortion is immoral, that penalty is moral, that penalty is immoral, I don't know. Capitalism is moral, communism is moral, whatever. Yeah, you're right in a sense that if you ask, okay, but who wrote the book of morality, in the sense like asking who decided what are the laws of morality? Well, I think if I understand your question correctly, well, there is obviously no book, and several people for different cultures or different times. I don't know what is considered moral nowadays. Maybe it was considered immoral 500 years ago, and so on and so forth. So actually morality can change between cultures, between times, even between individuals. That being said, I don't think morality is absolutely subjective. There are still, again, this will be a very...
Sorry for cutting you off. So one thing which is moral for me might not be moral for you?
No, it depends. I mean, on the one hand, I agree, but I don't think that morality is absolutely subjective in the sense that, yeah, up to a certain extent, I think there are some shared rules that are pretty much intersubjective. Then, of course, there is room for some individuality. Personally, I wouldn't go so wild to claim that, every person has their own morality, that's it. And every morality is equal. But if you say that morality can change over time or across cultures, yes, I definitely agree. What do you think?
So while we all live in society, we have some common moral wrong and right, and of course, not all can share this general general thought, but like 99% of people may think that murder is wrong, and there are more difficult questions like abortion, and so on and so on. So, like half of morality, maybe not half, just some percent of morality is about our living in society, and just some part our own.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I really like this idea, yeah, because, yeah, you're right. Every time there is a society, I mean, people living together, actually, it's natural that there is, as you said, some sort of implicit code of morality. Again, it doesn't mean that every member of the society agrees on it, but the vast majority does. Like, yes, some rules that, I don't know, if I steal your money, for instance, suppose we were offline and I steal your wallet, I mean, everybody probably would agree that it is immoral, okay? If if I give 0 points to everybody, even if your assignments are good, that would be immoral. So actually on many things, yes, we agree. I like this idea within society, or the vast majority of people agrees. Then, of course, yes, when you come to some issues, there can be much more division within society. Yeah, like abortion, the trolley problem. Yeah. Okay. Yes. Okay, yes, we have some time, so I can try to finish with the third part of what I plan to do. And then we will have a deserved break, and then in the second part, you will do exercises. So this part is about some tips that I hope are useful to recognize arguments in the wild, in the sense, in real life. Sorry. So far, every argument we discussed, it was already in the so-called standard form, like premise 1, premise 2, so on, and conclusion. Now, that's not how we argue in real life. I mean, I bet that outside this class, you have never met a person that reasons like this, that they say, yes, this is my premise 1, this is my premise 2, and this is my conclusion. It never happens, or almost never. So every time we actually deal with argument, again, in real life, so to say, they come in a messy form. Sometimes the conclusion might be at the beginning of the speech, sometimes might be in the middle, not always at the end. Sometimes arguments in real life can have extra material inside them that needs to be cleared. Actually, the exercise to put arguments in standard form, it's a very useful way to be able to evaluate them better, okay? So every time you find an argument in real life, and this will actually be part of the second assignment when you will be asked to evaluate an argument in real life. The first thing to do is to identify the conclusion, to be like, okay, what is the statement that works as a conclusion in this argument? For instance, imagine this case, or imaginary case of a lawyer. Actually, lawyers typically are people who are really good at arguing, and it's part of their job, actually, to be good arguer, good critical thinkers, so to say. And this imaginary lawyer can say, my client could not have shot the victim. The shooting happened at 10:05 p.m. My client was 30 kilometers away from the victim at 10 p.m. So 5 minutes before the shooting. So remember that from lecture 1, our definition of argument was an argument is just a set of statements such that one works as a conclusion and the other ones as premises. So this is obviously an argument. This is actually how arguments appear in real life. So here the conclusion, for instance, comes at the beginning. The conclusion is obviously that my client could not have shot the victim. Okay, and then we're basically given two premises. The shooting happened at 10:05, and the client of the lawyer was far away, just 5 minutes before the shooting. Yeah, that's what I just say. So again, and this is what I will ask you to do. It will be part of the second task, second graded assignments next week. The first thing we need to do to evaluate an argument, if you want to apply the techniques we are discussing, is to put it in standard form, okay? To just take some time, separate the conclusion, isolate it and put it at the end, and then identify the two premises, okay? So compare the example that I gave you about the victim, about the shooting and the lawyer, compare it with the second passage. The second passage reads, the victim, John Wilberforce, was a 55-year-old unmarried man who lived alone. He was shot on the night of November 19th. The police have one suspect for the murder, but have provided no information regarding the suspect, other than that he was a former business partner of Mr. Wilberforce. Is this paragraph an argument or not? Yes or no, and why? Anybody?
This is not an argument. There is no conclusion.
Exactly. Yes, this is not an argument. There is no conclusion, and also there is not this mechanism of premises supporting the conclusion. Okay, so it's just like telling some facts, but there is no conclusion and no premises supporting the conclusion. So it's not an argument at all. So the first rule, to identify an argument is to check if there is a conclusion and if the person is providing reasons for believing the conclusion. So coming back to the previous example that was an argument, now again, here I assume everybody will know the answer, that if we say just that the victim was shot at 10:05 p.m., the client was 30 kilometers away at 10 p.m., so the client, given it was 30 kilometers away from the victim, from the murder, just 5 minutes before, the argument has such is not valid, right? It could be that in 5 minutes this person covered 30 kilometers and killed, and the client killed the victim. It's logically possible. So an argument like this leaves out some implicit premises. Now, in real life, it happens all the time that we leave premises implicit. In the previous class, I told you that in many times, but not always, making premises explicit can actually further our understanding, because sometimes putting on the table something that was left implicit can actually illuminate, let's say, our understanding, or some old premise, background assumption might become questionable. It's not always the case, okay? Sometimes a missing premise, it really depends on context, on what arguments we are discussing. Sometimes the missing premise might be so obvious and known by everybody to be true that we don't waste time restating it. Sometimes, on the other hand, from other occasions, the missing premise was exactly what was exactly problematic, right? Like when we saw the case of Einstein, of quantum mechanics, and so on. So again, if you want to be fully explicit, you can say something like P3 and say my client could have not gotten within shooting range of the victim from 30 miles away in just 5 minutes, right? And then say the client was not within shooting range. And to shoot the victim, my client would have to be within shooting range. So again, it depends on the context. Maybe if the client we're talking about, I don't know, is a millionaire that, I don't know, has helicopters that can move, I don't know, cover 30 kilometers in 2 minutes, maybe we should consider this hypothesis, this background assumption. If the client is an ordinary person that cannot travel that fast in just 5 minutes, then we just don't consider. It really depends. It really depends on the context and on the specificity of the argument, whether we want to consider the implicit premises or not. Yeah. Also, this reconstruction. Actually, we already mentioned it, I think, in lecture 2, but these things called intermediate conclusion, I think we saw another case, but anyway, the idea is that of an intermediate conclusion, that's why I call it C1 instead of, P5. It's because sometimes arguments proceed in steps. You start from some premises, those premises bring you to a conclusion, and then you use that conclusion as a further premise towards the final conclusion. So those are called intermediate conclusion, because it's like an intermediate step in your argumentation. So again, when it comes to reconstruct arguments of other people, let's say that, again, arguments not made by you but by other people. So the first advice is to to identify the conclusion first. Put it in standard form, so premises separated from each other, and then the conclusion, and then ask yourself if you need to add missing premises, right? Whether it's necessary for the argument to fully make explicit some missing premises, okay? Also, when reconstructing arguments of other people, it's useful to bear in mind what is called the principle of charity, which is basically, if you're reconstructing the argument of someone else, you should, you should be fair towards this other person. You should attempt to give this other person the best possible reconstruction that you can reasonably attribute to this other person. Okay? So you shouldn't, for instance, attribute to this person something they did not say, right? Or misrepresent their views, right? But you are allowed to attribute missing premises that maybe the original speaker did not say explicitly, but that are part of what the speaker originally argued for. Okay. So again, it's okay to add missing premises if it's clear from the context that the speaker believed them to be true. Okay. So another advice, and I think it's the last one, is that many times when we encounter argument in real life, given that they come in a messy way, sometimes, let's say, a paragraph or a part of a speech contain many elements which are actually redundant. Or maybe, they're stated in various different forms. For instance, consider this passage. Will humans travel to the stars? Never. Such an enterprise will demand long-term concerted collaboration among many international partners. If recent history has shown us anything, it is that we are incapable of such cooperation. So this is obvious. This short passage is an argument, and it says the conclusion. Even though it is formulated like this with a question and an answer, if we want to reconstruct it, we just say, we remove, let's say, all these rhetorical aspects, and we just say, in the process of reconstruction, the conclusion is, human will never travel to the stars, okay? And then the premise is, human travel to the stars will demand long-term concerted collaboration among many international partners, okay? We will need to travel to the stars, this collaboration to the partners. Then there was this other bit which was, if recent history has shown us anything, then it has shown us that we are incapable of such cooperation. So, in the phase of reconstruction, it's actually, it's good to streamline and simplify. We can simplify this long sentence, if recent history has shown us anything. We can just rephrase it like, recent history shows that we are incapable of such cooperation. Okay? Why? Because it's when we come to assess the argument, we basically remove all the unnecessary parts, right? If recent history has shown us anything, feels unnecessary for the evaluation of the argument. The only bit that we need is recent history shows that we're incapable of such cooperation. So that would be actually, once you remove the unnecessary parts and you streamline the argument, it will become something like this. Now that it is in this standard form and in Polish, we are ready to assess it, okay? We will not assess it now. You can first check if the argument is valid, then you check for each premise if it's true or not. But now in this Polish form, it's much more easier to exercise critical thinking. Okay, well, sometimes when we are reconstructing, rhetorical questions need to be reformulated into statements. For instance, my opponent has received $9 million just this year in speaking fees from the financial industry. So here is some politician talking. Do you really trust her to support legislation that limits the financial industry? So here the conclusion is, again, is this rhetorical question. What the speaker is saying is that we should not trust her to support legislation that limits financial industry, blah, blah, blah. So, again, if we put it in standard form and simplify and remove all the unnecessary material, it becomes much easier than to assess the argument. The first thing we notice, for instance, is that as such the argument is not valid, and as usual, to make it valid, we should say like, if someone receives a lot of money from the financial industry, he will not support legislation that limits it. Okay, that's definitely one missing premise that is intended by the speaker, even though it's not clearly stated. So we can, according to the principle of charity, we can put it as an extra premise. The very last thing is this. Even, let's say, if a paragraph contains an argument, it doesn't mean that every part of that paragraph is part of the argument. So compare these two passages. The first one is the example we started with from the lawyer. My client could not have shot the victim. The shooting happened at 10:05 p.m. and my client was 30 miles away. So that was like the original version. But notice the longer version. My client, who is sitting in front of you today and was languished in the country jail for the last 8 months, could not have shot the victim. As you know, the shooting happened at 10:05 p.m. while my client was 30 miles away. It is indeed tragic that the victim was shot. But the perpetrator of this tragic event must have been someone other than my client. So notice that actually if we reconstruct the arguments, the reconstruction is going to be exactly the same in the first case and in the second case. Why? Because the second passage has many rhetorical tricks that actually do not add anything to the argument. For instance, when you say, my client is sitting in front of you today, it's like, okay, so what? That does not add anything to the conclusion. The conclusion is that the client is not guilty, right? Then, the client has languished in jail for 8 months. That's again an information which is not, it's unnecessary for the argument. It's actually just trying to elicit some pity from the court, but it's not part of the argument. So something else that happens is that the conclusion is stated twice, right? We say that the client could not have shot the victim, but also that the perpetrator is someone other than my client. Or also we say that, I don't know, the fact that somebody was murdered was a tragic event. So notice how in the second case there is much more extra information which is actually distracting from the very nature of the argument. If we want to assess the argument, we just need to remove, the longer one, yes, uses all this kind of irrational techniques of persuasion. But if we want to stick to the very nature of the argument, we should reconstruct and stick to what is essential to it. Okay, now, sorry, I was a bit quick with the last part, but now we have a break, 10 minutes, then we come back. If you have any questions, we can discuss them there. But now let's take a 10-minute break.
Okay.
See you soon.